Hello and welcome to Journey Through Time, where curiosity becomes comfort and history invites you to slow down. Tonight's journey takes us into one of humanity's oldest and strangest questions. Could Earth have been reset before? Could all we know be only one chapter of a much older story, with whole volumes erased before us? Wherever you are listening from, whether under a blanket, on your commute, or in a quiet room, this is your moment to pause with us. If you enjoy this kind of deep exploration, please tap the like button and subscribe so our community can grow. Now let's begin. For as long as people have told stories, myths, and history, there have been whispers of ancient catastrophes and lost ages, floods, fires, and forgotten civilizations. Legends that hint the Earth might have cleared its slate more than once. What if history is not a single line, but a cycle of rise, collapse, and renewal, older than we imagine? Imagine a world far older than our records, where civilizations rose and vanished before the pyramids, before writing, leaving behind only scattered stones and myths. Nearly every culture carries stories of floods drowning whole lands, fires consuming ages, or darkness swallowing the sky. Echoes of resets passed down through generations. Scientists often interpret these tales as metaphors for local disasters, but they might also preserve memories of events so vast they blurred into legend. If our own modern world lost electricity, satellites, and networks overnight, within decades, skyscrapers would crumble and forests would reclaim highways. In a few thousand years, only fragments of concrete, metal, and plastic might survive, puzzling future explorers. The same Earth that erased dinosaurs with a single asteroid, that buried Doggerland beneath the North Sea, and that melted ice sheets to flood ancient coasts, could just as easily have erased human worlds before ours. We stand on a thin layer of time, fragile and temporary, resting atop billions of years of upheaval, extinction, and rebirth. Seen this way, the idea of a reset is not fantasy, but part of the planet's rhythm, a cycle that scatters survivors, turns memory into myth, and forces life to begin again. The Earth itself is a system of cycles, not a straight line. Ice ages sweep across continents, then retreat. Supervolcanoes blanket skies with ash, plunging temperatures and collapsing food chains. Ocean currents shift, tipping the balance of weather for centuries, and asteroids slam into the planet with the force of millions of nuclear bombs. Each of these upheavals acts as a reset, sometimes gradual, sometimes abrupt, wiping away species, scattering survivors, and forcing evolution to start again. Even human history shows smaller echoes of this pattern. When Rome fell, Europe plunged into centuries of reordering before new systems emerged. When Maya cities collapsed, jungles swallowed temples while people adapted elsewhere. Resets are not always total annihilation. They are often partial, enough to scatter knowledge and push communities back into survival mode. Like the tiny mammals that endured the age-ending asteroid, survivors become the seeds of what comes next. This perspective reframes myths and ruins. Flood stories, fire legends, and tales of lost cities may be blurred memories of these resets. Stone ruins we puzzle over today might be outlines of earlier chapters. Our own achievements could one day become fragments, half buried, waiting for future generations to guess what kind of people we were. The word reset can mislead, suggesting a single moment, a button pressed, a neat before and after. But on Earth, it is layered, waves of change that erase, then renew, until the old world is unrecognizable and a new one grows from its ashes. When we trace Earth's deep history, we see at least 5 known mass extinctions. catastrophes so severe they erased most of life and cleared the stage for something new. About 250 million years ago, during the Great Dying, volcanic eruptions poisoned oceans, and climate swings killed over 90% of species. 66 million years ago, a single asteroid ended the reign of dinosaurs, igniting forests worldwide and darkening skies for years. Each extinction transformed the planet, forcing survivors into empty niches and sparking evolutionary bursts that reshaped ecosystems from the ground up. These events were not rare accidents, but part of a larger pattern, the Earth's own rhythm of destruction and renewal. Even ice ages have worked as slow resets. Over the last 2.5 million years, glaciers advanced and retreated at least 20 times, carving valleys, redistributing species, and drowning ancient coastlines when they melted. For early humans, these shifts were not abstract. They were lived experiences of hunger, migration, and adaptation. Sahara turning from green grasslands to desert, Doggerland disappearing beneath the North Sea, coastlines redrawn across Asia and the Americas, all direct consequences of ice and fire cycles. Volcanoes, too, have left human marks. The eruption at Thera around 1600 BCE shattered the Minoan civilization and may have inspired the Atlantis myth. Tambora, in 1815, plunged the world into the year without a summer, starving millions and changing history. These examples show that resets are not ancient relics, but ongoing forces, shaping both biology and civilization. They remind us that nothing is fixed. Fertile valleys may vanish under ice, forests may burn into plains, oceans may surge inland, and entire cultures can collapse. Yet resets also create fertile soil, new coasts, and unexpected opportunities. This is why myths, ruins, and geology all echo the same story. The Earth does not march steadily forward, but pulses with catastrophe and rebirth, and our species is only the latest note in that ongoing rhythm. Across cultures and continents, stories of floods, fires, and darkness return like echoes of an older memory. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of a deluge that nearly ended humankind. The Hebrew Bible describes Noah building an ark to survive rising waters. Hindu traditions tell of Manu saved from a cosmic flood. Greek myths recount Deucalion and Pyrrha, surviving Zeus's torrents. Hopi, Inca, and countless others recall waters high enough to drown the world. Fire myths mirror this. Norse Ragnarok, Hindu cycles of Shiva's destruction, Native American traditions of burning skies. Darkness myths speak of suns swallowed, nights that lasted for years, images that resemble volcanic winters, meteor impacts, or prolonged eclipses. These parallel myths are striking not just for their themes, but for their global spread. Separated by oceans and millennia, different peoples remembered the same types of disasters. The simplest explanation is that floods and fires are universal hazards, but the scale of these myths, whole worlds ending, suggests deeper roots. Perhaps survivors of ancient catastrophes passed down their trauma in story form until details blurred and became legend. Archaeology hints at how easy it is for entire chapters to vanish. Pompeii lay hidden under ash for nearly 2,000 years. Machu Picchu sat undiscovered to outsiders on an Andean ridge. Angkor, once a vast capital, was swallowed by forest. Each rediscovery shows how fragile collective memory is. Written history spans only about 5,000 years. Before that, we rely on scattered artifacts and eroded sites. Even with modern technology, more than 70% of Earth's surface, our oceans, remains largely unexplored. Rising seas at the end of the last ice age drowned entire regions. If coastal civilizations existed 12 or 15,000 years ago, their ruins may now lie hundreds of feet underwater. Occasional finds, stone structures off Japan at Yonaguni, submerged ruins in India's Gulf of Cambay, mysterious formations off the Bahamas, are debated but tantalizing. Most wood, textiles, and mud brick dissolve quickly. Only stone endures, and even that crumbles over millennia. If our own world were abandoned today, how much would survive 10,000 years? Skyscrapers would fall, roads would fragment, satellites would decay. Forests would grow over our monuments, rivers would carve through our cities. To a distant future humanity, we might seem like a whisper, a rumor of a civilization lost to time. These reflections make myths feel less like fantasy and more like a shared human memory of resets. They also reveal a larger point. Civilizations are temporary, and the Earth's cycles of ice and fire do not stop for us. When we step back far enough, even our greatest achievements begin to look fragile. Cities, highways, and satellites feel monumental, but measured against geological time, they are only scratches on a restless surface. Without constant upkeep, skyscrapers corrode, bridges collapse, and roads are swallowed by soil and plants within centuries. In a few thousand years, forests would stand where airports once sprawled. In 10,000, ice sheets or rising seas could erase entire coastlines. This is not speculation. It is the normal pace of Earth reshaping itself. Doggerland once connected Britain to Europe. Now it lies under the North Sea. Sundaland, once a vast stretch of Southeast Asia, is submerged beneath Indonesian waters. Beringia, the land bridge between Asia and North America, disappeared as ice retreated. These places were real, inhabited, and then gone. If their inhabitants left stories, those stories might sound like myths of drowned lands and vanished worlds. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu, even in known history, powerful cultures have dissolved into silence. The Indus Valley civilization built grid-like cities with advanced drainage, but left writing undeciphered and origins unclear before fading away. The Maya left jungle-covered pyramids when their cities fell. The collapse of the Bronze Age world around 1200 BCE erased empires, trade networks, and writing systems, plunging the Eastern Mediterranean into centuries of darkness. Each time, people adapted, migrated, and rebuilt, but knowledge was lost and memory blurred. These examples echo a larger pattern. Civilizations rise believing they will endure forever. Then they fracture under stress. Climate change, earthquakes, shifting trade, disease, internal conflict, and within a few generations, become ruins. This cycle mirrors nature's resets. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, sea level rises, and droughts push societies to their limits, scattering survivors and scattering stories. Over millennia, myths and ruins become our only clues. Archaeology is like reading the last few sentences of a book with most of the pages missing. If one site like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey can push back the timeline of complex society by thousands of years, how many more remain buried or eroded away? Even today, over 70% of the seabed is unmapped, and dense forests hide countless undiscovered sites. Time, water, and earth erase far more than we ever recover. Our own world, for all its technology, could easily become another lost chapter, with future explorers debating whether our age even existed as we imagine it. Seeing this clearly transforms myths from fanciful stories into warning signals. They show us how thin our layer of permanence really is, and how easily the Earth's cycles of ice and fire can make legends out of lives. To understand how deeply the planet resets itself, it helps to imagine time not as a line, but as a clock whose ticks are catastrophes. Each mass extinction, each abrupt climate swing, Each supervolcano or asteroid impact is another strike of the hand, erasing the familiar world and creating space for something new. Geologists read this clock in cliffs, ice cores, and ocean sediments. They see thin bands of ash, gaps where entire ecosystems vanish between layers, and sudden shifts in fossil records. The thin clay layer at the end of the Cretaceous marks the instant when an asteroid ended the dinosaurs' reign. Deeper still, the rock layers of the Permian record a time when 9 of every 10 species disappeared. These signatures reveal not a steady march of life, but pulses of destruction and renewal. Even ice ages and warm periods are part of this rhythm, sculpting continents, shifting oceans, and forcing life to adapt over and over again. Our entire recorded history, agriculture, cities, writing, fits into a single warm interglacial moment between ice ages, a rare window of stability in an otherwise restless system. We treat this stability as normal, but it is actually an exception. Beyond human memory, the Earth is dominated by extremes. Glaciers miles thick grind down mountains. Supervolcanoes pour ash across hemispheres. Cosmic impacts ignite global fires. Each event scatters survivors, erases records, and resets the clock. Myths of floods and fires echo this planetary pulse in human language. Legends of ages before ours, golden ages, sun cycles, worlds destroyed and reborn, mirror the pattern geologists see in stone. When we realize how fragile our moment is, we can also see how myths may serve as warnings. They remind us of a truth older than civilization. Nothing we build is immune to time. Even oceans, which seem eternal, shift dramatically. In the last 20,000 years, sea levels rose more than 120 meters, drowning entire continents' worth of coastal land. If humans lived there, their cities, farms, and monuments are now under hundreds of feet of water. This is not speculation, but geological fact. The maps we know today would have been unrecognizable to our ancestors, and they will be unrecognizable again to future generations. Ice advances, fire erupts, seas rise, and the world remakes itself. That is the true rhythm behind the myths of resets. Far from being ancient fables, these stories may be memory fragments of real catastrophes lived through by people whose names we will never know. Seeing Earth this way doesn't make it alien. It makes it alive, an organism with a heartbeat measured in cataclysms, one that keeps time with the rise and fall of worlds. If Earth's history reads like a book of resets, then extinction is one of its sharpest chapters, less an ending than a hard page turn. Every time a mass extinction sweeps the planet, it clears away dominant species, reshuffles ecosystems, and allows entirely new forms of life to rise. This isn't only ancient history, it's the foundation of the world we live in now. Without the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, mammals would never have inherited the Earth. Without the Permian extinction, the ancestors of reptiles and early mammals would not have flourished. Extinction functions as Earth's reset key, wiping the board clean enough for something different to emerge. On islands, we can see this pattern in miniature. A volcano forms new land. Plants, birds, and insects colonize it. Over time, unique ecosystems evolve. Then a storm, a flood, or human disruption wipes many of them out, and the cycle begins again. This same rhythm scales up to continents and epochs. Each mass extinction leaves not just loss, but opportunity, a landscape emptied of competitors, niches waiting to be filled, conditions ripe for evolutionary bursts known as adaptive radiations. Even in human memory, we witness smaller versions. Passenger pigeons erased within decades, mammoths gone from the plains, coral reefs bleaching and recovering in centuries. These events remind us extinction isn't abstract. It's visible, measurable, and ongoing. It also shows how fragile our place is. If our species vanished tomorrow, the Earth would heal and renew without us. Cities would crumble, forests would expand, oceans would reclaim coasts. In a few millennia, our traces would shrink to scattered ruins. In a few million years, they might vanish entirely, leaving future beings to guess whether we ever existed. This perspective doesn't diminish humanity. It situates us. We are participants in a cycle far older and larger than ourselves. Understanding extinction as a reset key also reframes how we view crises today. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecosystem collapse look like separate problems, but in geological terms they resemble the early stages of a planetary reset. Fast by Earth's standards, but slow by ours. The question is not whether Earth will survive, but whether we will survive as part of its next chapter. Seeing this clearly can shift our thinking from clinging to permanence to learning how to adapt. Extinction as a reset isn't merciful or kind, but it is fundamental to life's renewal. Every tree, every bird, every human exists because something else ended first, and every ending leaves space for beginnings we can't yet imagine. When we view humanity through the lens of Earth's resets, the familiar story of progress becomes something else entirely. Not a straight ascent, but a fragile interlude between upheavals. Civilizations rise, build monuments, map the stars, and master technology, yet every system we create exists inside cycles far beyond our control. Lost cities like Pompeii, Angkor, or the Indus Valley remind us how quickly achievements can be buried, forgotten, or reinterpreted as legend. Entire Bronze Age networks spanning the Mediterranean collapsed so thoroughly around 1200 BCE that writing systems vanished and trade routes dissolved, leaving archaeologists today to piece together fragments and speculate on causes. Multiply that by tens of thousands of years, rising seas, shifting rivers, and seismic upheavals, and it's easy to imagine that whole human ages could disappear without a trace. Our myths of Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu are not proof of such worlds, but signals of how we fill the silence of the past with memory, caution, and longing. Underwater archaeology has already shown that coastlines once teeming with people are now drowned hundreds of feet below the waves. Forest canopies and deserts hide countless undiscovered sites. Time erases far more than it preserves. Even our own era, built on steel, glass, and silicon, would not fare well against thousands of years of wind, water, ice, and tectonic change. Skyscrapers collapse within centuries without maintenance. Roads and dams fail, electronics decay, and forests reclaim what was once city. In the end, a few puzzling traces might survive, prompting future explorers to wonder who we were, just as we wonder about those before us. This perspective turns lost civilizations from romantic fantasies into logical possibilities. It reframes ancient ruins and global myths as the faint outline of earlier chapters, and it places our present moment inside a continuum of rise, collapse, and rebirth. Seeing this clearly is both unsettling and grounding. Unsettling because it undermines the illusion of permanence. Grounding because it shows we are part of a much larger pattern, one that continues whether or not we endure. It is within this pattern that myths become valuable, less as literal records and more as maps of every cliff face, ocean core, and mountain range is a page in Earth's archive, written not in ink, but in layers of rock, ash, and fossil. Thin bands of iridium reveal asteroid strikes. Sudden gaps in the fossil record signal extinctions. Shifts in sediment show ancient floods, shifting coastlines, and lost forests. Together they tell a story of disruption and renewal. The thin clay line at the Cretaceous boundary is a global scar marking the end of the dinosaurs. Deeper still, coal beds burned and oceans turned toxic during the Permian catastrophe. These layers are silent but clear. They show us the clock of reset striking again and again. Some scientists even suspect major upheavals follow rough cycles, tens of millions of years apart, a rhythm of destruction and renewal far larger than any human era. When measured against this deep time, our recorded history is a blink. Agriculture began less than 12,000 years ago, after the last ice age retreated. Cities and writing are only about 5,000 years old. The stability we take for granted is a rare intermission in a much wilder performance. In that intermission, we built global networks, satellites, nuclear weapons, and the internet. But all of it rests on a thin crust of calm. If that calm breaks, whether by natural forces or our own, the structures we depend on will not outlast the next ice, flood, or fire. This is not a doomsday prophecy, but a reminder of proportion. Earth has endured far worse than anything we have yet created. It heals, but on its own terms and timescales, not ours. Our challenge is to recognize the rhythm and act within it, to adapt rather than to imagine permanence. The geological record shows that after every collapse comes regrowth. Ecosystems repopulate, species radiate into new forms, landscapes are reshaped into fertile grounds. Even our own extinction would not be the end of life, but another reshuffling. Seeing ourselves in this continuum can be strangely liberating. It frees us from the illusion that we are the culmination of history, and instead places us as participants in an unfolding cycle billions of years old. Myths whispered by ancestors and evidence written in stone converge on the same truth. Resets are not exceptions, but the planet's heartbeat. Recognizing that heartbeat can change how we think about our future, shifting from fear of endings to preparation for change and respect for forces larger than ourselves. When you imagine Earth as a living clock, the most striking realization is that its hands are still moving right now. We are not standing outside of history, but inside one of its transitional phases, and many scientists warn we may already be accelerating another reset ourselves. The rate of species extinction today is far above normal background levels. Forests are shrinking, coral reefs are bleaching, ice caps are melting, and ocean currents are shifting, all in decades, not millennia. In geological terms, this is a lightning-fast disturbance. It echoes the opening stages of previous mass extinctions, except this time, human activity is a major driver. Greenhouse gases altering climate, deforestation changing water cycles, industrial fishing collapsing marine systems, and synthetic chemicals permeating soil and air. If Earth heals over millions of years, it may do so again, but not necessarily with us included. This is not a prophecy of doom, but a question of scale and adaptation. Past resets wiped out dominant species, yet life always continued in new forms. Small, overlooked survivors became the ancestors of future diversity. If our civilization falters, some remnant of humanity or another species could inherit the empty niches we leave behind, evolving into something unrecognizable over millennia. This perspective can feel humbling, but also clarifying. It shows our power, but also our limits. We are no more permanent than the trilobites or the mammoths, yet we are also participants in Earth's creative cycles, capable of influencing the next tick of the clock. Recognizing the pattern does not mean surrendering to catastrophe. It means preparing for change, building systems resilient enough to adapt, and remembering that nothing we build is immune to time. The myths of floods and fires thus become not only stories about the past, but warnings about the future. They tell us what it feels like to live through a reset, fear, displacement, hunger, rebuilding, and they hint at the qualities that let people endure: cooperation, memory, and adaptability. Even now, we can see how communities recover from disasters, how seeds sprout in ash, how life creeps back into Chernobyl's exclusion zone, or coral returns to Bikini Atoll after nuclear tests. These are miniature examples of the planet's healing power, but they also show how survival favors flexibility over rigidity. In that sense, myths and geology together form a manual, one we are only beginning to read. They teach us that endings and beginnings are intertwined, that permanence is an illusion, and that our role is not to stop change, but to navigate it. To grasp this is to see ourselves not as lords of the earth, but as one chapter in its ongoing story. A story still being written in floods, fires, extinctions, and rebirths. If we imagine Earth's resets as a sequence of tests, then myths, ruins, and geological records become lessons written across time. They show how fragile civilizations can be, but also how resilient life is when conditions change. Civilizations believe they are unique, permanent, and insulated from nature, yet each one leaves behind only fragments. Stones carved by hands, long turned to dust, half-remembered stories, and altered landscapes. Even our modern world, the satellites, the power grids, the global supply chains, rests on the same narrow foundation of climate stability and ecological balance that has toppled past societies when disrupted. Consider the Sahara. Only a few thousand years ago, it was a green corridor of lakes, savannas, and human settlements. Today, it's the largest hot desert on Earth. Consider Doggerland, Sunderland, and Beringia, once vast populated regions, now hidden under the sea. Even within historic times, cities have vanished under volcanic ash, earthquakes, tsunamis, and shifting rivers. Extend that process over tens of thousands of years, and entire epochs of humanity could dissolve without a trace. This is why the idea of lost civilizations is not merely fantasy, but a logical inference. The deeper we dig, the more surprises we find. Göbekli Tepe, built over 11,000 years ago, long before agriculture was believed widespread, redefined the timeline of complex societies. Off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Bahamas, divers have found submerged structures whose origins are still debated. Forest canopies in the Amazon reveal geometric earthworks suggesting pre-Columbian urban planning, larger than anyone imagined. These fragments may be the visible tips of a much larger submerged record. They imply that the line between prehistory and history is not fixed, but sliding backward as discoveries accumulate. If this is what we've uncovered with limited exploration, how much more remains lost to erosion, tectonic shifts, or rising seas? Seeing our own era through this lens changes the meaning of permanence. Our skylines, our monuments, even our digital archives are ephemeral on planetary timescales. Servers corrode, satellites decay, and paper burns. Stone endures longer but not forever. Even mountains erode to plains. In 1,000 years, a few ruins may remain. In 10,000, almost nothing. Yet the cycles of Earth do not end. They fold our traces into the soil, the ocean, the atmosphere, and the myths of those who come after. This recognition can feel ominous, but also profoundly grounding. It shifts our focus from trying to outlast time to trying to live wisely within it, to leave seeds rather than monuments, knowledge rather than fortresses, adaptability rather than brittle systems. Seen this way, we are not at the culmination of history, but part of a recurring wave of emergence and disappearance, one note in a long planetary rhythm of floods, fires, ice, and renewal. To look even deeper into this rhythm is to see that Earth does not simply destroy, it transforms. After every impact, eruption, or freeze, the planet rebalances itself, building new systems on the remains of the old. The thin soil we plant in today contains ash from volcanoes long extinct. Mountain ranges we see as permanent are the uplifted scars of vanished oceans. The oxygen we breathe was created by ancient bacteria that once triggered their own extinction by changing the atmosphere. Every feature of our world is a palimpsest, written over, erased, and written again. This is why healing on Earth is not about returning to what was, but about moving forward into what can be. After the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, mammals hidden in burrows emerged into a planet emptied of giants and diversified into forms that would one day become us. After the Permian collapse, ecosystems slowly rebuilt themselves from a handful of survivors. Even the nuclear scars at Chernobyl and Bikini Atoll now teem with wildlife, proving that life pushes back into every gap, however inhospitable. This planetary resilience offers a lesson to humanity. Our survival depends not on permanence, but on adaptability. The same forces that created fertile valleys and stable climates can take them away. The same oceans that gave birth to civilizations can rise and swallow them. The same forests that provided abundance can vanish into dust. We live in a brief warm interlude between ice ages, believing it will last forever. Yet the geologic record shows that extremes, not stability, are Earth's default. By seeing ourselves as part of this vast cycle, we can begin to act differently, not to escape resets, but to prepare for them, to weave knowledge into forms that might endure, and to build cultures capable of change. Myths of floods and fires, far from being quaint stories, are repositories of this adaptive wisdom. They teach respect for rivers, for forests, for balance. They show how communities endure disaster through cooperation, memory, and flexibility. Archaeology, meanwhile, shows the price of forgetting. Where myths disappear and records fail, lessons are lost, and societies repeat the same mistakes. By reading both myths and stones together, we gain a fuller picture of how civilizations collapse and how life continues. The key insight is humbling, but also hopeful. Nothing we make is truly permanent, but nothing living is ever entirely erased. As long as something survives, a seed, a story, a gene, renewal is possible. This is the deeper truth behind Earth's resets. Not annihilation, but transformation. A relentless turning of the clock in which endings and beginnings overlap and feed one another. Seen from the largest scale, Earth's resets are not random accidents, but the pulse of a living system: ice and fire, flood and drought, extinction and renewal. Every pulse rewrites the script of life. Every recovery invents new actors. The continents themselves record this choreography. Ancient seafloors raised into mountains, coral reefs fossilized high above sea level, lava fields spreading where seas once stood. In deep time, the planet acts like a slow sculptor, chiseling away at its own surface and starting over again. This perspective changes how we view ourselves. We are used to thinking of human history as linear: Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Industrial Age, Digital Age. But placed against 4.5 billion years, our ages are only sparks, brief experiments within a much larger cycle. Our cities, technologies, and borders seem monumental, yet they are less enduring than the glaciers that carved the valleys we inhabit. Even our ideas of natural climate are shaped by a rare window of stability. For most of Earth's history, the planet swung between extremes far beyond our modern experience. This makes the myths of resets more than poetry. They are survival memory. They carry encoded lessons about humility, about respecting forces larger than ourselves, about preparing for change. The Aztec belief in multiple suns, the Hindu yugas, the Norse Ragnarok, and the Hopi cycles of destruction and rebirth all reflect an instinctive understanding of planetary impermanence. These stories repeat because the conditions that inspire them repeat. Floods, fires, darkness, migrations, collapses, and rebirth. Archaeology supplies corroboration. Beneath the Amazon canopy, LiDAR scans reveal networks of ancient roads and earthworks, hinting at vast civilizations erased by disease and colonization. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe stands as proof that sophisticated societies existed millennia before our previous timelines allowed. Off continental shelves, sonar hints at drowned landscapes that could one day yield whole chapters of forgotten human history. Each discovery pushes back the line between myth and evidence. Each fragment we recover reminds us that what we think of as the beginning may actually be a middle or even an aftershock of something older. Our entire civilization could be one iteration of a pattern we barely understand. If it ended tomorrow, future beings might puzzle over our ruins the same way we puzzle over stone circles and underwater walls. This realization is sobering, but also empowering. If resets are inevitable, our best hope is not denial, but resilience. Cultures flexible enough to adapt, knowledge stored in ways that endure, and stories that outlast buildings. In that sense, myths are our most durable monuments. Stones erode, metal rusts, but stories travel light across generations, whispering warnings and hope into whatever world comes next. If myths are the oldest monuments, and geology is the deepest archive, then together they describe a planet that is always in motion, never fixed. Every cycle of ice, fire, flood, and extinction carves away one version of Earth and clears space for another. This is why every landscape is a palimpsest of past worlds. Beneath modern soil lie ancient seabeds. Beneath those seabeds lie lava plains. And beneath the lava lie older continents folded and buried like forgotten pages. Even the atmosphere carries the fingerprints of resets. Carbon spikes from mass extinctions, oxygen surges from microbial revolutions, and chemical traces of cataclysms long faded. From this vantage point, the Earth does not simply support life, it sculpts it, challenging each generation of species to adapt or vanish. We humans are no exception. We arose after a sequence of planetary crises, shaped by ice age migrations, volcanic bottlenecks, and shifting climates. Our bodies, our cultures, even our myths, are the product of survival in unstable conditions. Yet in the last few thousand years, we've built an illusion of permanence. Roads spanning continents, cities of steel and glass, archives of data in climate-controlled vaults. Compared to geological time, these are sandcastles at the edge of the tide. In a single millennium, without maintenance, forests will split the concrete, rivers will drown the subways, glaciers will grind the skyscrapers to rubble. In 10,000 years, our greatest structures will be ambiguous ruins. In 100,000, the evidence of our existence may be compressed into a thin layer of anomalous chemicals and plastics in the rock record. To a future intelligence, that layer might read like the iridium band that marks the asteroid impact, an abrupt signature of a vanished world. This perspective is not meant to provoke despair, but clarity. It shows us how small our window is, but also how powerful adaptation can be. We may not stop Earth's cycles, but we can choose how to live inside them, whether to exhaust our world or to align with its rhythms, whether to leave brittle systems or resilient ones, whether to pass down silence or knowledge. In every myth of flood and fire, there is also a theme of survival. An ark, a mountain refuge, a chosen remnant, seeds saved for planting after the waters recede. These motifs remind us that renewal depends on preparation and memory. The seeds we plant, literally and culturally, are what carry forward after resets. In this way, our stories and our actions today shape not just our own future, but the starting point of whatever comes after us. When we finally accept that Earth's resets are not isolated events, but the fundamental tempo of the planet, we also begin to see our place differently. We are not at the end of history, but within an unfolding cycle whose scale dwarfs our lifetimes. This awareness can dissolve arrogance and sharpen responsibility. It dissolves arrogance because it shows that even our largest systems, global trade, digital networks, nuclear arsenals, are temporary configurations riding on a shifting crust. It sharpens responsibility because it reminds us that what we do now can influence the kind of world that emerges after the next reset. Fossil fuels, deforestation, mass extinction, geoengineering. These may become the triggers, accelerants, or mitigations of future planetary change. Just as small mammals shaped the post-dinosaur world, our choices may shape the conditions for whatever comes after us. If we seed the world with resilience, biodiversity preserved, knowledge stored, cooperative cultures built, then recovery may be faster and richer. If we leave behind only chaos and collapse, the recovery may be slower and poorer. In this sense, the myths of floods, fires, and cycles carry a hidden directive: prepare, plant, adapt. They are not only stories about destruction, but guides for continuity. Our ancestors may not have had geology or climate models, but they had memory and pattern recognition. They saw rivers swell, skies darken, and coasts vanish. They embedded that knowledge into narrative so descendants would know how to respond when it happened again. Today we have data and satellites, but often ignore the deeper lesson. Cycles will continue. We cannot freeze the Earth in its current state, but we can navigate its shifts with foresight. This does not mean living in fear. It means living in awareness, building systems flexible enough to bend without breaking, valuing diversity, redundancy, and long-term thinking over brittle efficiency. It also means understanding that permanence is not our legacy, but influence is. Every act of restoration, every archive of knowledge, every seed bank, every cultural story is a thread thrown forward into an uncertain future. In this way, even if our era ends, some echo of us will help shape what comes next. That is the essence of living within the cycle rather than against it. To contribute to the continuity of life instead of clinging to an illusion of immovable order. To stand at the edge of deep time is to realize that Earth's story is not a ladder, but a spiral, each turn bringing familiar forces back in new forms. Ice advances, then retreats. Volcanoes lie dormant, then roar awake. Seas rise and fall. Species bloom, dominate, and vanish, making space for successors. Civilizations mirror this spiral on a smaller scale. We build, expand, specialize, and interconnect until the very complexity that sustains us also makes us fragile. A drought, a plague, a war, a collapse of trade. Any of these can unravel centuries of progress in a generation. Multiply that by planetary forces beyond our control, and it becomes clear how easily whole ages can disappear. We live in a rare intermission between ice ages, and we have used this calm to build a technological civilization unlike anything before. Yet our cities sit mostly on coasts, our food chains depend on a narrow climate band, and our digital archives rely on constant power and delicate infrastructure. Left untended for even a few decades, much of it would fail. Left for centuries, it would vanish almost completely. Future beings might discover scattered alloys, traces of plastic polymers, and a sudden geochemical spike marking our presence, a thin layer like the iridium band of the dinosaurs' demise. From this vantage point, myths like Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu read as echoes of real losses. They may be distorted memories of ancient coastlines drowned at the end of the last ice age, or of cultures erased by eruptions, earthquakes, or abrupt climate swings. Even if those specific names are inventions, the pattern they encode is authentic. Archaeology already hints at vast unexplored chapters. Göbekli Tepe, the submerged ruins of Dwarka off India's coast, mysterious structures off Japan, the geometric earthworks hidden beneath Amazon forests. Each discovery stretches the timeline of human sophistication farther back, undermining the neat story we've told ourselves about linear progress. Each suggests that the difference between history and prehistory may be more about what survived than what actually existed. The deeper lesson in all of this is about memory and preparation. Our ancestors embedded survival lessons in myth, warnings to respect rivers, forests, and cycles, stories about chosen seeds or arks or refugees preserved to restart life after disaster. We have tools and data they could never dream of, but we risk forgetting the older wisdom about resilience. We focus on efficiency instead of redundancy, on permanence instead of adaptability. Yet the record of Earth says redundancy, diversity, and adaptability are what persist through resets. If we want any echo of our world to survive, it will not be skyscrapers or hard drives, but seeds, stories, and resilient systems that future beings can inherit. Seeing ourselves as part of a 4.5 billion year cycle changes our sense of legacy. We are not building a monument outside of time. We are placing a marker within an ongoing rhythm. Our mark can be either a brittle spike of consumption or a scaffold of knowledge and living diversity to help whatever comes next. This awareness does not diminish our achievements. It amplifies their context. It says our greatest responsibility is not to escape resets, but to ensure continuity through them, to act as ancestors rather than mere occupants, and to recognize that endings and beginnings are threads of the same tapestry. When you look at humanity through the lens of planetary time, even our boldest achievements begin to resemble temporary adaptations to a changing environment. The domestication of fire, the invention of agriculture, the rise of cities, the creation of industry, each of these was a response to conditions at a particular moment. They were not inevitable milestones, but opportunistic experiments that flourished in a window of climate stability. We tell the story as if it were a straight ascent, but in truth, it is a patchwork of rises and falls. The same Nile that nurtured Egypt also drowned it in floods. The same monsoon cycles that fed the Indus Valley shifted, leaving dry riverbeds where cities once stood. The same interconnected trade networks that made the Bronze Age rich also made it vulnerable to cascading collapse. These patterns are the smaller echoes of the great resets etched into stone and fossil. By studying them, we learn that the key to longevity is not size, not power, but flexibility, the capacity to shift strategy when the ground moves under our feet. In biology, this is called resilience. In culture, it manifests as memory, diversity, and cooperation. Cultures that record disasters, preserve seeds, maintain decentralized knowledge, and plan for extremes can endure shocks better than those that forget their past or concentrate their lifelines in one place. Myths of floods, fires, and darkness are part of this cultural memory. They are psychological seed banks, keeping alive a narrative of caution and adaptation even when the disaster is far in the past. Modern science gives us climate models, seismographs, satellite data, and genetics, but it does not automatically give us the humility to use them wisely. We can predict ice loss and sea rise, but still build cities at the water's edge. We can model pandemics, but still dismantle public health systems. We can measure extinction rates, but still strip habitats bare. In this sense, our technological power may magnify our vulnerability if it convinces us we are immune to cycles. Yet geology and myth alike remind us that no civilization has been immune. What survives a reset is not wealth or monuments, but knowledge embedded in flexible, redundant, low-tech, widely dispersed forms. Oral traditions, seed banks, diverse languages, decentralized skills, and sustainable practices can pass through bottlenecks far better than centralized grids or proprietary codes. If we act now to scatter our cultural and biological seeds, we increase the chances that something of us will endure beyond the next upheaval. If we do nothing, we risk becoming another thin layer in the rock record, a brief anomaly of plastic and carbon spikes, debated by future beings as a mystery. Understanding this does not require fatalism. It invites a different kind of ambition, to build systems that can bend, not break, to measure success, not in monuments, but in continuity, to think of ourselves not as the culmination of history, but as caretakers of a living archive that must be carried through storms. Myths from every culture already model this stance. The ark builder, the fire keeper, the knowledge preserver, the wanderer who carries seeds across deserts, the small group who remembers the old ways after catastrophe. These archetypes endure because they work. They are not only stories about survival, but instructions for how to live when the world changes. By combining their wisdom with our data and technology, we can become better ancestors for whatever future emerges after the next reset. If we imagine the next 1,000 years not as a smooth line, but as a series of stress tests, the question becomes, what of us will cross the threshold? Throughout history, those who survived upheaval were not always the strongest or the wealthiest, but the most adaptable. The ones with distributed skills, networks of mutual aid, and the capacity to change course when old patterns failed. Hunter-gatherer bands endured ice ages, small villages rebuilt after empires crumbled, oral traditions preserved cosmologies and medical knowledge across millennia without a single written word. This is why the deepest resilience is cultural, not technological. Technology amplifies capacity, but culture encodes survival. Today, we stand at an inflection point where our technologies and our culture are often in tension. We produce satellites, seed banks, and vast archives of digital knowledge, but we also concentrate power and fragility in centralized grids, just-in-time supply chains, and hyper-specialized systems. Without active effort, much of our knowledge could disappear in a single long blackout. A solar storm stronger than the Carrington event of 1859 could cripple global infrastructure. A pandemic, drought, or cyber attack could cascade across interconnected systems faster than our capacity to respond. These are not hypothetical risks, but historical patterns scaled up to global reach. Yet the same interconnection that breeds fragility also allows for unprecedented cooperation. Never before has humanity had the ability to model planetary processes, coordinate across continents, or share data instantly. This gives us a chance no previous civilization had, to anticipate resets and prepare deliberately. The myths of floods and fires once encoded local survival strategies. Today, they can inspire global ones. Seed vaults in Svalbard, open-source knowledge repositories, decentralized energy grids, and cultural exchange networks that ensure no single shock erases everything. These are modern arcs, built not to escape the planet, but to ride its cycles. Our challenge is psychological, to replace the fantasy of permanence with the practice of stewardship. Instead of asking how to preserve everything unchanged, we can ask how to pass forward what is essential: genetic diversity, ecological balance, core knowledge, ethical frameworks, and the capacity for cooperation. Doing so requires humility, because it means accepting that the Earth is larger than us, that its rhythms will continue, and that our task is not to conquer, but to accompany. The geologic record shows that after every collapse comes regrowth, but the shape of that regrowth depends on what seeds remain. In mythic language, this is the moment of choosing what to load onto the ark. In practical terms, it is about investing in redundancy, diversity, and memory, rather than mere efficiency. If we succeed, future beings may look back at our layer in the rock, not as a sudden spike of destruction, but as the foundation of a resilient new chapter. If we fail, we become a cautionary tale told by descendants who rebuild in our shadow. Either way, the cycle continues. Seeing this clearly can shift us from despair to agency, to recognize that even in the face of planetary resets, what we do now matters profoundly for what comes after. Standing at this threshold, it becomes clear that the true legacy of any civilization is not its monuments, but its transmissions. Stones fall, metals corrode, archives burn, but ideas, practices, and seeds can leap across generations and geographies. This is why myths endure long after empires collapse. They are light enough to travel, vivid enough to be remembered, and flexible enough to adapt. In a world of resets, this makes narrative a survival technology. Just as DNA carries biological information through time, stories carry cultural information. They encode warnings, values, techniques, and maps of how to navigate upheaval. When a flood myth describes an ark, it is also describing a protocol. Store diversity, preserve essentials, prepare for scarcity, keep knowledge portable. When a fire myth tells of renewal, it is reminding listeners that destruction is not final, that rebuilding is inevitable, that continuity depends on courage and cooperation. Modern science can complement these narratives by providing data and tools, but it must be woven into the same kind of cultural memory if it is to endure a long interruption. Decentralized libraries, redundant backups, open-source knowledge, multilingual traditions, and practical skills embedded in everyday life can all act as cultural seed banks to bridge resets. This is why seed vaults matter, why biodiversity corridors matter, why oral histories matter, why teaching children the basics of ecology, cooperation, and resourcefulness matters. These are not nostalgic gestures, but survival infrastructures, just as vital as levees or power grids. Even now, we can see how fragile our high-tech world is. A solar flare, a geomagnetic storm, a prolonged blackout could erase decades of digital information in days. Without power, data centers are inert, and servers are vulnerable to decay. In contrast, a story carried in a grandmother's mind, or a seed kept in a clay pot, needs no electricity to persist. The challenge for our age is to make our most essential knowledge and diversity low-tech, enough to pass through bottlenecks, while still using high tech to distribute and improve it before the bottleneck arrives. This approach mirrors nature's own strategy: redundancy, decentralization, and diversity at every scale. The more species in an ecosystem, the more resilient it is to shocks. The more diverse a culture's lifelines, the more likely it can withstand crises. Myths of floods and fires are, in this sense, early lessons in systems thinking, urging us to spread risk, to build arcs before the waters rise, to plan not for stability, but for change. They are the memory of countless forgotten catastrophes condensed into archetypes. By listening to them alongside science, we can act not from fear, but from wisdom. We can decide now what to safeguard, how to disperse it, and who to teach. If the future is a storm, then the present is the time to pack the boat. When we follow this thread far enough, we discover that resilience is not a single trait, but a tapestry woven of many strands. In nature, redundancy protects life from collapse. A forest regenerates because countless seeds scatter beyond any single storm. An ecosystem survives because multiple species can perform overlapping roles. In human cultures, resilience works the same way. Diverse languages, decentralized skills, distributed governance, and plural worldviews provide buffers against shocks. When one system fails, another can pick up the slack. In contrast, hyper-centralization and monoculture create brittleness. The Bronze Age collapse shows this vividly. Interconnected trade and specialization made the Eastern Mediterranean wealthy, but when drought and invasions disrupted those lifelines, kingdoms toppled like dominoes. Writing systems disappeared, cities burned, and populations dispersed into smaller, more self-sufficient communities. This dark age was also a reset, and from its ashes, new forms of society emerged, smaller, more adaptive, eventually laying the groundwork for the classical world. This is why myths of cycles often include not only destruction, but rebirth. They teach that even after catastrophe, seeds sprout, communities rebuild, and stories resume. Today we face a similar choice, but on a planetary scale. We can double down on fragile centralized systems, or we can cultivate diversity, redundancy, and local autonomy, while still maintaining global cooperation. This is not a romantic call to abandon technology, but a sober strategy to ensure that our technological civilization can bridge a bottleneck rather than shatter under stress. Imagine a future where essential knowledge exists simultaneously online, in print, orally, and in living practice, where food systems combine high-tech efficiency with local biodiversity, where energy grids are decentralized enough to survive disruptions, where cultures treat myths not as superstition, but as memory maps showing how to endure upheaval. In such a world, a reset would not erase everything. It would compress it, redistribute it, and set the stage for renewal. This perspective also changes how we view time. Instead of aiming for permanence, we can aim for succession. Planting not just trees but forests, not just schools but traditions, not just archives, but habits of transmission. The goal is not to freeze history, but to make its flow survivable. This is how our species can become a long-term participant in Earth's cycles rather than a brief anomaly. Myths and geology converge on this lesson. The flood myth does not end with the water rising. It ends with a new covenant, a planting of seeds, a promise to remember. The fire myth does not end with ashes. It ends with phoenix wings or green shoots. These archetypes are blueprints for resilience disguised as stories. By decoding them with modern science, we can design a civilization that acts like a living organism, adaptive, redundant, diverse, and therefore capable of passing through the narrow gates of planetary change. To understand what it means to truly live inside Earth's cycles, imagine a civilization designed not as a fortress, but as a forest. A fortress treats the world as an enemy to be walled out, betting everything on strength and permanence. A forest treats change as inevitable, building strength through diversity, redundancy, and constant renewal. In a forest, when one tree falls, light floods in and a dozen seedlings race upward. When fire sweeps through, some seeds only germinate in heat, ensuring that new life follows destruction. This is the model nature offers us. If our infrastructures, institutions, and cultures mirrored this, resets would still happen. Storms, quakes, climate shifts. But they would not necessarily become existential. Instead of brittle collapse, we would see controlled burns, managed retreats, and distributed adaptation. This is the difference between being erased by change and flowing with it. Our myths already hint at this model. Flood myths show not only the deluge, but the ark, a portable seed of life and knowledge. Fire myths show not only destruction, but renewal, a phoenix rising or a sacred flame carried forward. Migration myths show not only exile, but expansion. People spreading, adapting, mixing, and creating something new. In every case, survival depends on mobility, memory, and multiplicity. This is why oral traditions can outlast writing, why small communities can reconstitute culture after empires fall, why diverse ecosystems recover faster than monocultures. Today, we stand at a crossroads where we can choose which model to follow. The industrial era built fortresses, centralized power grids, global supply chains, financial systems tightly coupled across borders. This created immense capacity, but also immense fragility. A shock in one place can ripple instantly worldwide. In contrast, a forest model would blend high-tech coordination with local autonomy. Energy would be generated in many small nodes, food grown in diversified systems, knowledge stored redundantly in digital, print, and living form. Cultures encouraged to maintain multiple languages, skills, and traditions. This is not regression, but resilience, a way of ensuring that when the next reset comes, as it inevitably will, humanity does not vanish, but adapts. Seeing civilization as a living forest also changes our sense of legacy. We might stop measuring greatness by skyscrapers and GDP and start measuring it by soil health, biodiversity, knowledge retention, and adaptability. We might invest not in single monumental projects, but in countless small, distributed ones, whose combined effect creates robustness. This is how coral reefs form, how mycelial networks stabilize forests, how planetary systems maintain balance. By aligning our structures with this principle, we increase the chance that some version of our knowledge, our values, and our species crosses into the next epoch. Myths would then become not warnings of inevitable doom, but reminders of a path already chosen, a path of regeneration, decentralization, and continuity. In this light, Earth's resets cease to be apocalyptic endpoints and become catalysts of transformation, pushing each generation to innovate ways of enduring and thriving amid change. When we trace the arc of all these ideas, one pattern keeps surfacing. The future is not secured by predicting every threat, but by weaving systems that can survive the unknown. Throughout history, the people who endured upheaval were not those with the most information about the disaster beforehand, but those who had built flexibility, community, and memory into their lives. This is the hidden lesson in flood stories, phoenix legends, migration epics, and the cyclical cosmologies of many cultures. They are training manuals disguised as myth, showing how to live when the map dissolves. In a world of resets, survival depends on what you can carry, what you can teach, and what you can regrow. In our time, the equivalent might be seed banks, decentralized knowledge archives, resilient networks of mutual aid, and skills embedded in everyday practice, rather than locked in fragile systems. A community that can grow its own food, share energy locally, teach children practical knowledge, and maintain cultural continuity orally is far more likely to recover after a systemic shock than one that relies entirely on distant supply chains and centralized expertise. This principle scales up to the planetary level. Just as biodiversity cushions an ecosystem, cultural and technological diversity cushions civilization. Multiple languages, legal systems, energy sources, and economic models create a mesh rather than a single point of failure. This is why homogenization, whether ecological or cultural, is dangerous. It erases the redundancies that make adaptation possible. Geology shows us that every era of stability is temporary. Myths remind us that every disaster is survivable. Together, they point to a new measure of progress, not growth for its own sake, but the ability to maintain continuity across change. This requires a mental shift from fortress thinking to forest thinking, from permanence to succession. Instead of imagining a final state of perfection, we can imagine a long relay of stewardship, where each generation receives a living system, adapts it to new conditions, and passes it on. This approach does not erase ambition, it redirects it. Our greatest ambition can be to build the most adaptable civilization in Earth's history, one that can bend without breaking, distribute risk across countless nodes, and preserve the seeds of knowledge and biodiversity through any bottleneck. Myths of cosmic cycles, from the Hindu Yugas to the Norse Ragnarok to the Hopi worlds, can be seen as narrative blueprints for this relay. They teach that worlds end and begin again, and that the key to continuity is not clinging to the old, but preparing the new. By aligning our institutions, technologies, and cultures with this insight, we can turn planetary resets from existential threats into evolutionary thresholds, passages through which our descendants, or our cultural heirs, can step into futures we cannot yet imagine. If we project these ideas forward, we can imagine a civilization that treats each generation as both beneficiary and ancestor, receiving the earth in one state, then passing it on altered but intact enough for renewal. Such a civilization would accept resets as part of the pattern, not as apocalypses to be feared, but as thresholds to be crossed. It would plan not only for prosperity in stable times, but for continuity in turbulent ones. This means storing knowledge in many formats and places, cultivating skills that are hard to erase, maintaining biodiversity as a living library, and embedding resilience into everyday culture. It means designing cities that can retreat from coasts if seas rise, infrastructures that can fail gracefully rather than catastrophically, and communities that can meet basic needs locally, even when global systems falter. This model does not require abandoning technology. It requires using technology to decentralize, diversify, and empower, rather than to centralize and homogenize. We already see glimpses of this approach. Seed vaults in the Arctic, open-source projects preserving data, off-grid energy systems, permaculture networks, citizen science archives, and indigenous knowledge revived to restore landscapes. Each of these is a modern arc, a seed of continuity scattered across time and geography. If scaled and connected, they could form a planetary safety net, capable of catching at least some part of our world as it falls through the next bottleneck. This perspective also changes how we measure success. Instead of counting only immediate economic output or territorial expansion, we could count the degree to which we have increased the diversity, redundancy, and adaptability of our systems. We could reward designs that function like ecosystems, producing no waste, cycling nutrients, regenerating themselves. We could elevate stories and rituals that teach long-term thinking, seeing culture not as entertainment alone, but as the mechanism by which survival lessons travel across centuries. In such a framework, myths of cycles become living curricula rather than relics. Flood stories would be taught alongside climate science, phoenix legends alongside disaster preparedness, migration epics alongside lessons in mobility and adaptation. Children would grow up not only with technical skills, but with the mental models of resilience. The effect would be to normalize impermanence and prepare people to navigate change with creativity instead of panic. Over time, a civilization built on these principles would resemble a living organism, flexible, distributed, and resilient enough to absorb shocks, shed parts, and regenerate. This would not make it immortal. Nothing is. But it would increase the odds that some essence of it survives every reset, shaping the conditions of the next epoch rather than vanishing into silence. In this way, we would become conscious participants in the Earth's great cycle of destruction and renewal, steering our fragment of the spiral instead of being swept away by it. When a civilization finally internalizes the truth of cycles, it stops asking, "How can we last forever?" and begins asking, "How can we hand off wisely?" This is the essence of deep time thinking. It treats each generation as a bridge, not an endpoint, each system as a stage, not a monument. In this worldview, resets are not annihilations but intervals, the low tide between waves, and continuity becomes an art form. The Polynesian navigators who crossed the Pacific in wooden canoes, memorizing the stars, the swells, and the bird paths, were practicing this art, storing knowledge redundantly in minds, songs, and rituals, so that no written chart was required. The medieval seed savers who passed their harvest from family to family did the same. So did the storytellers of flood myths, the keepers of fire, the builders of underground granaries. Each of these practices assumed impermanence and designed for continuity anyway. If we bring this mentality to the planetary scale, we might see our technologies not as fortresses, but as sails, tools to ride the shifting winds, to explore and adapt. A decentralized internet with open protocols can survive longer than a handful of corporate servers. A distributed energy network drawing from sun, wind, and water can recover faster than a single giant grid. A polyglot culture with multiple languages and knowledge traditions can reconstitute faster than a monoculture. Redundancy, diversity, portability, and adaptability become the core design principles. This is not speculation, but the distillation of everything geology and myth have been telling us. Even the rock record shows it. Layered strata, where one ecosystem vanished and another flourished. Alternating bands of ash, silt, and fossils, recording chaos and renewal. Thin horizons of anomalous chemistry, marking abrupt turning points. Our own layer is forming now. Plastic, concrete, radioactive isotopes, a spike of carbon. We can still influence what that layer means. Will it mark a brief flare of consumption, followed by collapse, or a deliberate seeding of resilience for whatever comes next? Our myths say we get to choose how we enter the next chapter, as the heedless who drowned, or as the ark builders who planted the future. This choice reframes even our day-to-day lives. Every seed bank donation, every open-source library, every tradition passed to a child is an act of continuity. Every local network built, every diversified system adopted, every cultural memory preserved is a plank in the boat. And every time we tell these stories about cycles, about resets, about surviving the unimaginable, we strengthen the narrative immune system of our species, making it harder for collective amnesia to erase what we have learned. By seeing ourselves as ancestors rather than owners, we gain a new kind of power. Not the power to halt change, but the power to shepherd life through it. To carry this vision forward, we must also rethink what we call progress. For centuries, progress has been measured by scale, speed, and control. Bigger empires, faster machines, tighter command over nature. But in a world of resets, the more tightly a system is wound, the harder it breaks. True progress in this context is measured by how gracefully we can absorb shocks, how quickly we can reorganize, and how well we can pass knowledge forward. This is the hidden logic of Earth's cycles. Not punishment, but pruning. Not apocalypse, but pruning back to essentials so new growth can emerge. Forest ecologists call this succession, and cultures can practice it too. Instead of clinging to outdated infrastructures until they fail catastrophically, we can design deliberate transitions, controlled burns, phased retreats, diversified lifelines, so that no single disruption erases everything. This approach has roots in both myth and science. Myths teach humility, stewardship, and the inevitability of change. Science gives us the data to anticipate thresholds and plan accordingly. Together they offer a roadmap. Recognize the cycles, scatter the seeds, distribute the lifelines, and prepare the arcs before the waters rise. Our ancestors encoded this wisdom in stories about chosen survivors, sacred mountains, and world trees, holding multiple realms. Today, we can encode it in open databases, seed vaults, and community networks. Each culture can become a custodian of some part of the planetary archive, holding a fragment of knowledge or biodiversity that others do not, so that no single catastrophe erases all. This distributed custodianship would mirror nature's own strategy, spreading risk, diversifying adaptations, and ensuring regeneration. It also changes our sense of identity. Instead of seeing ourselves as isolated individuals or nations, we can see ourselves as threads in a global, multi-generational tapestry. This does not erase difference. It makes difference essential, like varied species in an ecosystem. Diversity becomes our collective life insurance, a guarantee that some part of humanity, or some form of our knowledge, will always find a way through. This perspective also reframes our relationship to time. Rather than trying to build immortal monuments, we can build traditions and infrastructures designed to be renewed, updated, and reinterpreted. Rather than fearing resets as endings, we can treat them as invitations to shed what no longer works and carry forward what does. In doing so, we align ourselves with the same creative rhythm that has shaped life since its beginnings, a rhythm of emergence, disruption, adaptation, and renewal. The ultimate lesson of myths and geology alike is not that catastrophe is coming, but that change is constant, and that continuity belongs to those who accept change and design for it. By adopting this deep time perspective, we reclaim agency from fear. We cannot prevent every upheaval, but we can decide what we send into the future, which seeds, which stories, which systems, which values, so that whatever world emerges after us carries some echo of who we were. To live as if we are ancestors, rather than mere occupants, reshapes everything about our choices. It changes how we build, how we teach, how we govern, and how we imagine the future. Instead of asking only what benefits us now, we ask what might carry value through the bottleneck of a reset. This is a radical shift in perspective, but it is also an ancient one. Indigenous cultures around the world have long spoken of 7 generations, weighing decisions by their effects far beyond one lifetime. Modern science, too, gives us tools to model impacts decades or centuries ahead. Yet we still struggle to integrate this long view into everyday action. The myths of cycles can help because they provide emotional scaffolding for thinking across vast timescales. They remind us of humility, but also of continuity, showing that every end hides a beginning and every catastrophe contains seeds of renewal. From this vantage point, the Earth is not a backdrop, but a partner, an evolving system whose rhythms shape and are shaped by life. Our task is not to halt those rhythms, but to synchronize with them, to create cultures and technologies that ebb and flow rather than shatter under strain. In practice, this means designing everything, from housing to energy to education, with redundancy, adaptability, and local sufficiency in mind. It means cultivating a sense of shared custodianship over knowledge and biodiversity. It means valuing oral transmission, cross-generational mentorship, and practices that keep vital skills alive outside of fragile digital systems. It also means confronting uncomfortable truths, that some infrastructures must be let go, that some territories will be lost to rising seas, that some industries cannot continue unchanged. This acceptance is not defeat, but strategy. Like a forest shedding leaves in winter, letting go creates room for what can survive the next season. This approach mirrors the regenerative cycles of nature itself. Compost feeding soil, floods nourishing deltas, fire clearing underbrush for new growth. By embedding these principles into our global culture, we shift from trying to win against nature to learning how to dance with it. A dance our species has performed for hundreds of thousands of years, but temporarily forgotten in the illusion of permanence. If we succeed in this shift, resets lose some of their terror. They become thresholds our descendants are prepared to cross, carrying stories, seeds, and skills into whatever comes next. In this way, our greatest legacy will not be a frozen snapshot of our civilization at its peak, but a living toolkit for navigating change, a legacy of adaptability, stewardship, and courage that turns each reset from an ending into a passage. As this long journey through time reaches its latest chapter, one more truth rises to the surface: the power of perspective itself. Seeing ourselves inside Earth's cycles does not diminish our importance. It clarifies our role. We are neither masters nor mere victims of the planet's rhythms. We are participants with unique capacities, memory, foresight, imagination, that can be used to shape how the next reset unfolds. These capacities are our most enduring technologies. Long after satellites have fallen and servers have rusted, a story told from parent to child can still carry knowledge across centuries. A seed saved from one harvest to the next can still carry life across generations. A ritual enacted at the right time can still knit communities together when the wider world collapses. This is why myths matter, why archives matter, why diverse languages, crops, and skills matter. They are the scaffolding of continuity, the lightweight threads strong enough to stretch across deep time. If we take them seriously, we can begin to reorient our goals. Instead of endless growth, we can cultivate lasting fertility. Instead of centralized power, we can build networks of reciprocity. Instead of trying to freeze the world, we can prepare to move with it. This reorientation can happen at every scale: personal, communal, planetary. On the personal level, It means learning practical skills, preserving family stories, and practicing adaptability. On the communal level, it means building mutual aid networks, protecting local biodiversity, and teaching children to see change as normal rather than catastrophic. On the planetary level, it means open knowledge systems, distributed energy grids, and coordinated seed banks, a planetary arc built not in one place, but everywhere at once. The goal is not to guarantee immortality, nothing can, but to scatter enough continuity that some part of our collective story survives every upheaval. In this way, even resets become chapters in a much longer saga of learning and renewal. When future beings study the thin layer of plastic, carbon, and isotopes we leave behind, they might also find seeds germinating in forgotten vaults, stories etched on stone, or living traditions passed down unbroken. They might see not just a spike of destruction, but evidence of a conscious species preparing for change. And in that recognition, they might find the same spark of connection we feel when we uncover the ruins of forgotten civilizations, a bridge across time, proof that someone cared enough to send a message forward. This is the ultimate legacy. Not control, not permanence, but continuity. It is the legacy encoded in myths of floods and fires, in geological strata, and in the quiet choices we make today. As our exploration comes to a close, take a deep breath and remember how vast the story truly is. We have traveled through myths and geology, through floods and fires, through lost civilizations and hidden futures. At every turn, the message has been the same. Nothing on Earth is fixed, yet nothing is ever entirely lost. Life adapts, stories endure, seeds wait for the right season to grow. Our place in this cycle is not to stand apart, but to participate, to become ancestors rather than mere occupants, to scatter continuity into the future so that something of us survives every reset. This is the deep time perspective, humbling but empowering, reminding us that permanence is an illusion, yet influence is real. Each choice we make today, each seed planted, each story preserved, each act of resilience, is a thread thrown forward to a world we will never see, but can still help shape. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found these ideas meaningful, please like the video, share it, and subscribe so that our community can grow. Together we can keep exploring the hidden patterns of the past and the possibilities of the future. You've been listening to Journey Through Time, where history slows down, myths breathe, and the cycles of Earth come alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and remember, every ending is also a beginning.